Wind gusts up to 100 miles per hour are ripping through the Midwest tonight. A heat index of 120 degrees is about to hit the Deep South. And right now, 20 counties are under a severe thunderstorm watch as we speak. 3 separate disasters are unfolding at once, which means almost nobody in this country is spared tonight. Folks, grab a seat right now, because tonight's setup does not let up until sunrise. There is a 4th threat out west, which means almost nobody saw this part of the forecast coming. We will get to that one before this video is all the way done. Mark my words. Here is what is happening on the ground in Illinois, which means tonight starts right here. A cluster of storms has merged into one fast line, which means the threat turned far more serious. Meteorologists call this a derecho, which means the entire line moves and hits as one single unit. This is not your average summer storm, which means treating it like one could be a mistake. A derecho travels in a nearly straight line, which means it slams city after city without slowing down. That line is currently stretching from the upper Midwest down through the Ohio Valley. Radar is showing winds near 100 miles per hour, which means this line means business. A gust that strong matches a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, which means this is not normal. Those numbers are not a typo, folks. That is hurricane force wind over dry land, which means cornfields get stripped bare and power poles can snap within seconds flat. Frank, a retired teacher down in Springfield, Illinois, is watching this line head straight for him. Frank has lived through plenty of Midwest storms, which means he knows when tonight's radar looks different. He says the sky already turned that strange greenish color folks talk about before a bad one. The Storm Prediction Center has this corridor under a slight risk, which means millions share tonight's threat. Forecasters Smith and Dean at the Storm Prediction Center issued this outlook early this morning from Norman, Oklahoma. Their official wind gust range for tonight's line sits between 60 and 85 miles per hour. Western Kansas sits inside an enhanced risk zone, which means the worst of the worst is concentrated there. Storm fuel out there, the energy these storms feed on, tops 3,500 joules per kilogram. In plain English, that is about as much rocket fuel as a summer storm can ask for, which means any thunderstorm that fires in that zone has a real shot at becoming a supercell. A supercell is a rotating thunderstorm, and rotating storms are the ones that drop the largest hail. Forecasters are watching for hail up to 2 inches wide, which means windshields and roofs are at risk. That hail is large enough to total a windshield, which means parked cars are not safe either. A weak dry line out ahead of the main zone is helping fresh storms fire late this afternoon, which means a second round of storms could form well after the first line passes today. Forecasters expect peak intensity right around the evening commute, which means rush hour gets a lot more dangerous. That is the worst possible timing, which means thousands of drivers could get caught on open highways. Heads up if you live anywhere near Garden City, Kansas, or Amarillo, Texas this evening. Very steep temperature changes high in the atmosphere are in play, which means storms can intensify fast, which means any storm that forms can cool itself explosively and punch out severe gusts fast. Back across the Great Lakes, that derecho line is gathering strength, which means it is not slowing down. Dale, a retired electrician up in Toledo, Ohio, knows exactly what these winds do to a power grid. Dale spent 30 years climbing poles after storms like this one, and he is taking no chances tonight. He already pulled his trucks into the garage and charged every flashlight in the house. 100-mile-per-hour winds meeting aging power infrastructure is a brutal combination for Ohio tonight, which means widespread outages are a real possibility before most families even sit down for dinner. Crews across the Ohio Valley are staging trucks ahead of this line, and that tells you something. Up in Wisconsin, this storm complex has triggered Watch 422, which means forecasters see real danger building. That watch covers 20 counties stretching from the Minnesota border into the upper peninsula of Michigan. Inside that Wisconsin watch box, the tornado threat itself is rated low, but the wind threat is not. Forecasters rate both the wind and hail threat as moderate, which means This is not a drill, which means both damaging gusts and 2-inch hail are squarely on the table through early afternoon. That watch runs until 2 o'clock this afternoon, which means the clock is ticking on this one. Folks who live anywhere near Green Bay or Eau Claire need a way to get warnings tonight. No two ways about it. Sleeping through a derecho warning is how families get hurt in this country. So that is threat number 1, a fast-moving derecho with gusts near 100 miles per hour. Good grief. Which means a wind event like this only comes around a handful of times each summer. Now we turn to threat number 2, because the heat side of tonight's forecast is just as serious. That same ridge of high pressure baking the east all week is clamping down even harder by tomorrow. Afternoon highs across the Mississippi Valley and the deep south are forecast to reach the low 100s, which means the actual air temperature alone would be dangerous. And the humidity makes it so much worse. Margaret, a retired nurse in Lake Charles, Louisiana, has treated heat stroke patients every July of her career. Margaret says the body simply cannot keep up once the heat index crosses 115 or so. Tomorrow across the Gulf Coast, that heat index is forecast to hit 120 degrees. At that number, sweat sitting on your skin cannot evaporate fast enough to cool your body down. The warning covers Winnebago, Boone, McHenry, DuPage, and Kane, which means much of northern Illinois is included. That warning issued out of the National Weather Service office in Chicago runs straight through midnight Thursday, which means this heat is not a one-day event. It is locking in for several days straight, which means your own natural cooling system basically shuts off right when you need it the most. Doctors call this the danger zone, and Margaret has seen it put healthy adults in the hospital. It gets worse after dark, too, since lows only dip to 85, which means no real cool down, which means there is no real break for your body, your air conditioner, or the power grid overnight. Grid operators across the region have started asking residents to cut back on power use during peak hours. That is not routine, folks, which means a real warning about possible rolling blackouts tonight. Air conditioners are running non-stop in this heat, and the grid was not built for that load, which means one overloaded transformer or a single hotline could knock out power to thousands of homes. Losing power during a heat dome is not minor. It can turn deadly fast for older residents. No two ways about it. This is exactly the kind of heat that fills up emergency rooms. So that is threat number 2, a heat dome pushing the heat index to 120 degrees. Now we head to the northeast, because that same storm energy is not finished with this country yet. The same energy driving the Midwest derecho is fueling the Northeast, which means nowhere is exempt. A belt of strong upper-level winds is pushing across New York, New England, and the Mid-Atlantic today, which means isolated supercells can spin up there too, even this far from the main severe weather zone. Sandra, a retired librarian in Alexandria, Virginia, keeps a weather radio on her kitchen counter every summer. Sandra says she has learned the hard way that Virginia summers can turn violent with almost no warning. Forecasters expect a few line segments to bow out, which means damaging wind gust racing east by evening, which means cities like Washington, Baltimore, and Philadelphia could see sudden wind damage by this evening. This is the kind of setup that catches people off guard. Since the morning starts calm and sunny, out of nowhere, the sky can turn dark and the wind can rip through in minutes flat. Which region do you want us tracking next? The plains, the Gulf Coast, or the Northeast? We read every comment, and tonight's question genuinely helps us decide where to point the cameras tomorrow. Every region we just covered is fighting its own version of tonight's weather at the exact same time, which means no matter where you live in this country, you have a reason to pay attention tonight. And that brings us back to that fourth threat we promised you near the start of this video. Out west, wildfires burning right now have stopped behaving normally, which means a new threat is born. The heat off those flames is so intense it is creating its own weather system in the sky. Meteorologists call this a pyrocumulonimbus, which means the fire itself is now generating real thunderstorm power. Picture a thunderstorm, except instead of forming from ocean moisture, it forms from smoke and raw heat, which means the cloud can grow tens of thousands of feet into the sky in under an hour. Good Lord. These fire-generated storms can punch as high as a strong hurricane's eye wall. Once that cloud gets tall enough, it starts firing its own lightning down at the ground below. Here is the part that should concern you. That lightning is not bringing any rain with it. Forecasters call it dry lightning, which means a strike with zero rain to put a fire out, which means every single strike has the potential to spark a brand new fire on bone-dry ground. Type your city into the comments below so we know exactly where to focus tomorrow's update. Meanwhile, in Toledo, Dale says gusts near that 100-mile-per-hour mark already snapped a branch. Smoke from these fires is already starting to drift east, which means hazy skies for several states. Air quality alerts are likely to follow for anyone downwind of that smoke plume by tomorrow. Firefighters on the ground say this fire is now making decisions faster than crews can react to, which means evacuation orders can change within minutes, not hours, once a pyrocumulonimbus cloud forms overhead. Out of nowhere, this fire stopped behaving like a wildfire and started behaving like its own weather system. Mark my words, this fire behavior is becoming far more common during heat domes like this one. Earl, a rancher out in western South Dakota, has watched fire weather change for decades now. Earl says ranchers out west watch the sky for smoke the way they used to watch for hail, which means the fire season itself is starting earlier and behaving more violently than it used to. So that is the fourth threat we promised you. A wildfire generating its own lightning storms out west. 3 states face high to extreme fire risk tonight, which means crews are stretched thin already. Red flag warnings are up in Colorado, which means humidity could fall into the single digits, which means a stray spark from equipment or a dragging chain could ignite a brand new fire. Wind gusts in those fire zones could reach 45, which means flames can spread even faster. That kind of wind can turn a small grass fire into a fast-moving emergency within minutes. Fire crews call this no joke, which means one of the most dangerous setups of the season. Here is how it all comes together, because tonight really is a tale of 3 completely different disasters. A derecho with gusts near 100 miles per hour is tearing through the Midwest and Ohio Valley. A heat dome is pushing the heat index to 120 degrees across the deep south. And wildfires out west are now strong enough to build their own thunderstorms and spark new fires. Plain and simple, which means 3 disasters rarely line up on the calendar quite like this. Even Margaret down in Lake Charles calls tonight one of the most demanding nights of the summer. Honest to goodness. Most severe weather injuries happen to folks who had warning and never acted on it. If a tornado or severe warning hits your phone, which means you act on it right away. Get to the lowest, most interior room in your house, away from windows, the moment alerts arrive, which means an interior bathroom, closet, or hallway. Not a porch, a garage, or a parked car. Turn around, don't drown. Also applies tonight if flash flooding shows up anywhere near that severe storm line. Just 6 inches of moving water can sweep an adult away, which means never underestimate flooding. 2 feet of water can float a car off the road, which means turning around saves lives. Flat out. The safest move during any of tonight's 3 threats is simply staying off the road. Comment the name of your town below, and we will work it into tomorrow's update for you. We will keep tracking all 3 threats overnight, which means updates the moment anything changes. Your town could shape exactly what we cover in tomorrow's video. No joke at all. Nobody is ready for how fast tonight's setup can change once that sun goes all the way down. Which means the forecast you are watching could shift within just a couple of hours from now. Roaring back with a vengeance is exactly how forecasters describe this pattern repeating into the holiday period. Which means do not expect a quiet stretch of weather once the 4th of July rolls around either. Joining forces is the only way to describe a derecho, a heat dome, and dry lightning hitting together. Keep your phone charged tonight, because losing power is the one thing that cuts you off from warnings. Which means this stretch of the calendar is shaping up as one of the busiest of the summer. Here is the bottom line. Folks, tonight is not a night to silence your phone's weather alerts. Which means that basic weather app could be the difference between sheltering and getting caught off guard. Dale up in Toledo has his radio charged, and Margaret in Lake Charles has her water bottles filled. Frank in Springfield keeps one eye on the sky, and Earl in South Dakota is doing the same. Sandra in Alexandria says the one thing she never does anymore is silence her phone during a watch. Hits different when you realize every one of these threats is happening within the same 48 hours. Good Lord. Which means 3 disasters and 3 coasts share one single overnight stretch together. Plain and simple. Tonight calls for a charged phone, a full tank of gas, and a real plan. 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts tearing through the Midwest and Ohio Valley tonight. A heat index of 120 degrees bearing down on the deep south tomorrow. And 20 counties still sitting under that severe thunderstorm watch as this very hour ticks by.